Hi, this is Phil again, and we're now going to look at both in this and the next teaching what is really the engine of the small group Bible study, and that is the question. If you have good questions, it can really help the study to be meaningful and engaging. So, just to reflect on the value of questions, as a leader, they can actually help you evaluate the group. Now, the group won't know that, but as they answer your questions, it will give you an idea of their level of Bible understanding, theological understanding, background, and therefore it can help you know where to aim as you continue to work through the Bible study. It enables people to discover truth for themselves as well. And this is something that is always rich. And one of the big, powerful things about the School of Biblical Studies and the Bible Core course is it's a school where people discover the scriptures for themselves. And when you do that, you're likely to remember it so much more, and it has so much more meaning, significance. They prevent the group leader from becoming an authority figure. And what I mean by that is that there's a recognition that everybody has a part to play. This is not a one-person show, but rather all are able to contribute. And of course, the group learn to think for themselves. And I guess we've covered that with point number 2. But it is important because this is something that people can take away and put to use in their own personal and private study. Now, the skill of question asking, of course, is something that grows with experience, but just a few pointers here. When you ask a question, it's really important to give people time to think about the questions. One of the temptations is to be uncomfortable with the silence that follows. It's as if you're wanting someone to respond quickly. But if the questions are good, then there's going to need to be time for thought, especially with introverts. They process internally, and what you want is to give them time. And so it can be helpful to say something like, I'm going to give 2 minutes or 3 minutes or some amount of time so you can think about this. And then that can stop you feeling awkward and your people too. Sometimes that can be a help. Let the question be answered by more than one person. If someone responds to the question very fully and very well, it can be tempting to think, well, that's answered, that's that, and move on to the next, rather than saying to the person, thank you, that's really helpful, someone else please. Let someone else contribute. And what can be a full answer, we can discover actually there's more to be said, and we want that input. Normally, we would let someone speak out. Now, it depends really how well you know the group and the kind of study you're doing, but to be able to let people respond, it brings a sense of freedom and life in the Bible study. It's a better way to go, I think. Another big one is to encourage people that when they talk about the questions, answer the questions, their thoughts on the passage, to speak to the whole group. There's been times when I've been involved in this kind of thing and the person has looked at me directly all the time as if they're answering the question just for my benefit. But what we want is people to realize they're contributing to the whole group and to speak to the whole group and not just a group leader. And one of the big ones, of course, is to never ask questions that have an answer that is simply yes or no. What we want is open-ended questions that people can't answer with a yes or no. They have to go into more detail to answer those questions. So we use open-ended questions, such as, why do you think this is true? Or how is this important? Or what does this truth mean for our lives today? Or how would you explain this to someone else? These kind of questions that require a paragraph, so to speak, rather than just a simple true or false, yes or no answer. Do not choose questions that set a limit. Don't ask questions like, what are the 3 things we learn about? Because if you do that, then the group will be trying to think, what are the 3 things that you're thinking about? And one of the poor elements of question asking is to have people try to guess your mind. So rather than engaging with the text and the scripture through the question, they're trying to think now, what does Philip want? What is he seeing? What do I need to answer to get the right answer? So that Philip, if I was leading the study, they're thinking that Philip would agree with, or he's trying to find. We don't want them to be trying to guess what's in their mind. We want them to engage with the scripture and very often discover things that we hadn't thought of. Now, if you are using a study book with questions, and especially if the group is new to this and new to one another, because it's kind of in the book and all very solid, this can be helpful to simply go round to each person. That's a way of breaking the ice and getting people comfortable with one another. But normally, we'd want people to volunteer their answer rather than being addressed directly. So we want to ask questions that cause people to think about the significance of the passage. And in doing that, we want to keep the questions not only questions that they need to answer with a paragraph, with a number of words, but we don't want the question to be complex. And a complex question is when there are 2 or 3 questions in one. If rather than one question with 2 or 3 questions together, we would break them up into 3 separate questions. So if the question has an and or a but in it, then it's probably 2 questions. And you need to look at that and break them up into separate questions. Now, what do you do if the person is way off beam? Their answer really has nothing to do with the passage. Maybe it's a sincere answer, but it's really wrong. You know that, you studied the passage. Then your job as the leader is not to ignore that, but to respond to it. And there's different ways to respond to it. One is to re-ask a question. Did you understand the question? Let me say the question again. Or if they have, to affirm them for speaking and maybe bring a gentle correction, but better to let others answer that question. And it may be that others will come in and bring the correction that is needed. Or ask them why they came to that conclusion. What was it that led you to that conclusion? And then maybe you can bring a little bit of correction into that. But we do want to know how to deal with questions, because this, as I said earlier, it's not about a pooling of ignorance. It's about engaging in a living way with the scripture. So bring a gentle correction, ask someone else, or engage with them, trying to find out what led them to that conclusion. Now, as you're preparing for your small group Bible study, you do need to take time to write out your questions. And the power of this is you can think them through carefully, and you can make sure they're open-ended, and that they are not complex, that they are going to help open up the passage, and that becomes a part of your lesson plan and really important. It is helpful at the beginning of the study just to give ground rules about the question and answer time, just so that people know. You can say it's possible to get carried away, and we don't want anybody to be dominating the group, so I may step in and ask you to bring your contribution to a conclusion, and then you need to be faithful to do that, of course. It may be that you want to say to people that this is confidential, and we want to create a sense of confidentiality here. You may say that we need to respect one another and let people finish before there's any discussion. You don't jump in and cut people off in the midst of what they're sharing. And so this kind of thing, the ground rules, so that people know how the study is going to proceed. But don't be frightened to use questions that deal with feelings as well as facts. These are the questions of a little bit more personal. How do you respond inwardly to the claims that Jesus makes, for example? Or how do you feel about these teachings on love? So we're looking for the emotional element as well, because of course that's all part of our humanity, and engage with that. Now, if you're asked a question as a leader, and that is possible, people may say to you, explain to me about this, that, or the other. And if you can, answer questions with a question. Especially if the answer's in the text. Try to put it back on them so they're pushing in more and gaining more through their study. It may be at times you just need to answer them. It may be it's a little bit of teaching that's needed. But you need to, of course, judge that. But if possible, answer questions with a question. And sometimes, too, it's good to use a very direct question to help people face the issues of the passage. What would your response be? How do you feel about this? How do you think you would react in this situation? So they're kind of direct and not just general. Now, errors in question asking, try to avoid asking questions that don't sound conversational. We want our questions to sound conversational because we want to engage people in the conversation. This is not an interrogation. You don't want those kind of questions that feel like people are under a microscope. If you write your questions beforehand, which of course you will as part of your lesson plan, don't just read them out, but just know them and ask them in a very conversational, chatty way. Let me repeat, don't be afraid of silence after asking a question. This is worth repeating because it is such a big deal. We need to be happy with silence. And of course, don't limit yourself by only asking questions. There are times that you join in the discussion and you contribute to what is in your mind and heart. Now, you have to be careful with this. If it's likely to shut down the discussion, then you may need to hold back a bit. But hopefully that won't be the case. Don't ask questions that can be answered with a yes or no. We've looked at that already, and questions that are too complex. These are, in one sense, two sides of a coin. Be aware of those. But also, don't ask questions that you don't know the answer to. And because if you do, as people work this through, you're not sure whether your conclusion is healthy or not. Now, this is kind of not absolute, and it does depend on the question, of course, but generally speaking, you ask questions that you've done some thinking through on yourself, so you're in a good place to lead that study and lead it to its meaningful conclusion. Do watch out for answers that are based on what people bring to the text. So again, you're looking for the deductive comments and helping people understand why they're deductive and not inductive, and get them into the text and drawing out what they want to see and the answers they have from the text. This is all part of the skills of imparting good study understanding to your people in the small group.